David Sinclair is a professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School, and his purpose in life has always been to help humanity fight aging. He has been researching it for decades, and he thinks aging is a disease that is treatable. And in his book, Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to, he writes about the past, the present, and the future of aging research, and by the end of the book, he tells us what he personally does to hopefully age at a slower pace and increase his lifespan. With that said, I highly recommend you read the entire book and not just skip to the end. But even if you've already read the book, I recommend you stay and watch this video, because I'll be talking about things he has said in interviews that he didn't mention in his book, things he has started doing after his book was published, and much more. But I have to say that neither I or David Sinclair are medical doctors, so this is not medical advice. Always consult your doctor. With that out of the way, let's get started. Let's talk about how we can stay healthy throughout our lives and increase our lifespan. One thing that will almost certainly help you live longer is to eat less often. In other words, intermittent fasting, or even prolonged fasting from time to time if you're up for the challenge and if you're careful. As long as you're smart about it and don't overdo it, and as long as you make sure this doesn't lead to malnutrition, fasting won't hurt you. On the contrary, it will dramatically improve your health. In one experiment, rodents that went hungry every third day lived 15 to 20% longer than the rodents that were allowed to eat as often as they wanted. And human studies show that people who fast are thinner, have lower blood pressure, and have lower levels of the hormone IGF-1, something that has been linked to longevity. People with low levels of IGF-1 get age-related diseases less often, and women with parents and grandparents that lived past the age of 100 usually have low levels of IGF-1. In fact, IGF-1 levels predict with great accuracy how long someone will live. In the Greek island of Icaria, one of the blue zones, people are Orthodox Christians that fast fairly often, and they live a pretty long time. Most experts recommend fasting for at least 16 hours a day, but if you can fast for 18 or 20 or even 22 hours a day, that is most likely healthier as long as you're consuming enough nutrients. An alternative to intermittent fasting is calorie restriction. The problem with calorie restriction is that you never get to fully satisfy your hunger, so for most people, it's much harder than intermittent fasting, but it works just as well. A very long study conducted by the University of Wisconsin separated 76 rhesus monkeys into two groups. One group was allowed to eat as much food as they wanted, and the other group was fed 30% less food. The calorie restricted group lived about 2/3 longer, and quite a few of them lived to be 40 years old, which is the longest time rhesus monkeys are expected to live. With that said, calorie restriction also prolongs the life of yeast cells, rodents, fruit flies, and there's plenty of evidence showing that it works on humans as well. The president of the Paris Medical Academy, Alexandre Guignot, who happened to die at the age of 102, practiced calorie restriction. Also, back in the days when people were expected to live very long and healthy lives in Okinawa, Japan, people were consuming fewer calories than in most other parts of the world. They had a saying that reminded them to stop eating once they were 80% full, harahachi-bu, and even in school, children were consuming about 2/3 of the calories Japanese school children were consuming in mainland Japan. And at the time, Okinawans were expected to live much longer than in Japan and most other parts of the world. Following a plant-based diet is another thing that could have a very positive impact on your health and longevity. Multiple studies have demonstrated that eating a lot of animal products can increase one's risk of developing heart disease and cancer. In fact, plant-based diets are one of the few things all the blue zones had in common. In Okinawa, Japan, Icaria, Greece, Ogliastra, Italy, Nicoya, Costa Rica, and Loma Linda, California, people were living very long and healthy lives consuming very little animal products. In fact, according to Dr. Stephen Gundry, author of The Plant Paradox and The Longevity Paradox, who happened to live and work as a nutritionist in Loma Linda, California, in the blue zone, vegans are the ones who live the longest, followed by the vegetarians. followed by the meat eaters. If we don't consume animal protein, an enzyme called mTOR is inhibited, and this is a very good thing because this forces cells to spend less energy dividing and puts the body in a state of autophagy. In a state of autophagy, the body recycles damaged and misfolded proteins, something that prolongs the life of different organisms. One of the very few drugs that has successfully and significantly extended the life and health span of different organisms is a drug that inhibits mTOR and activates autophagy. It's an immunosuppressant drug called rapamycin, and it can prolong the life of yeast cells, fruit flies, and mice. And although we don't yet know if it can prolong the life of humans, David Sinclair and other longevity scientists such as Peter Attia think that it probably works. But how much and how often to take it is still being researched, and taking too much could be very dangerous. So for the time being, it's only prescribed to organ transplant patients at relatively low doses. In the future, it could potentially be used to extend the life and health span of humans. But for now, to stay safe, lower your animal protein intake. Don't even think about taking rapamycin to prolong your life just yet. Let's move on to exercise, which, as you probably already know, is great for you. Jogging, weightlifting, and even walking all count as exercise, and they all improve blood flow, lung and heart health, extend telomeres, boost mitochondrial activity, and do so much more. People who jog a couple times a week are a lot less likely to develop heart disease and reduce their chance of death of any cause by about 45%. Although David Sinclair thinks that the intensity of your exercise matters. According to him, high-intensity interval training is the best exercise for longevity. Sprinting for a few seconds and then allowing your body to rest and recover before sprinting again stresses the body just enough for it to activate the longevity genes. High-intensity interval training is also great for losing weight, as it burns more fat for longer than traditional exercise does. Cold exposure, interestingly enough, is another interesting way to probably prolong your life and to lose weight. Rodents subjected to shivering cold for a few hours a day are less likely to get diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, and are also less likely to become obese. Cold temperatures activate brown adipose tissue, and studies show that besides activating the body's longevity genes, it may help you lose weight and even improve your mood, as there are studies showing that cold showers help with depression. Brown adipose tissue is a mitochondria-rich substance that decreases as we age, but it is most abundant in the abdomen and in the upper back and shoulders. So if you're going to take a cold shower, it's a good idea to let the cold water hit those places. But if what you want is to look younger, let it also hit your face and hair, as cold water makes your skin more smooth and your hair more shiny. Everything from cryotherapy to cold showers to walking out in the cold without too many clothes on, and even sleeping without too many blankets in a cold room will probably activate your body's brown adipose tissue, activate the longevity genes, and burn fat. Just be a little careful and don't overdo it. Hypothermia won't improve your health and it won't prolong your life, but shivering in the shower or in a cryotherapy tank for a few minutes a day over long periods of time just might. After hearing me talk about the health benefits of giving up meat and following a plant-based diet, restricting calories, fasting, exercising, exposing yourself to cold temperatures, and giving up sugar, I know I haven't talked about that yet, but you know it's coming. You might be wondering why prolonging your life has to be so unpleasant. Why can't anything healthy be easy and pleasurable? This is where I want to introduce something called hormesis, which is basically what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Vaccines are a perfect example. They help develop immunity by imitating an infection, causing the immune system to produce antibodies that protect us against that specific infection. Vaccines make us feel weak and sick for a day or two, but the trade-off is a stronger body that is better prepared to fight a potentially deadly virus. The point that I'm trying to make is that a small dose of something bad is very good. Go without food long enough and this will lead to malnutrition and eventually death. Stay out in the cold long enough without anything to keep you warm, and you just might end up with frostbite or hypothermia. But fasting for 16 or 20 hours a day, or even longer from time to time, will not only not kill you, but drastically improve your health, just like shivering for a few minutes a day in the shower. Think of intermittent fasting and cold exposure as vaccines, if you will. When life gets too easy and comfortable and we only do what feels good in the moment, such as eating meat and sugar, become sedentary, and we're always comfortably warm, our body doesn't have the need to turn on its longevity genes, and this comes back to bite us when we're old. Fasting, restricting calories, low-protein plant-based diets, exercise, and cold exposure are like vaccines. They're a small dose of something bad, and they cause the body to activate longevity genes that help it stay alive and healthy for longer. In short, to live longer, the body has to feel as if it's close to dying. Thousands of years ago, when human beings were hunter-gatherers, finding food was a lot more challenging, so eating as much food as possible, even when they were already full, made sense because those extra calories could save them from starvation in case food became scarce. Even better if the food was rich in proteins such as meat, or if it was high in sugar because these foods provided them with a relatively high amount of calories and energy, two things that were essential for survival back then. Basically, our bodies crave these foods and derive so much pleasure from them because they protect us from starvation. A person who completely gives into their cravings and eats sugar and animal protein to the point of becoming obese can survive for longer without food than a thin person who follows a plant-based diet and practices intermittent fasting. So you could argue that eating as often and as much as you can is good for you if you're afraid of a famine, but if what you want is a long and healthy life, you're much better off controlling yourself. The problem is that the human body has not evolved that much. It's not very concerned about the future. It's afraid of food becoming scarce in the near future and starving, so it makes us crave protein and sugar to stay alive in case something goes wrong. But with a surplus of food we have today, things don't ever get so bad. At least not for people living in developed countries, as starvation has become extremely uncommon in those places, and surviving short term is no longer a challenge for most people. The challenge we face today is to fight against our short-term survival instincts and instead survive long-term. In other words, to live a long and healthy life without getting age-related diseases. In order to achieve this, we have to chase after the exact opposite of what human beings were chasing after thousands of years ago. We have to chase after discomfort in a world of comfort. This is the pathway to a longer and healthier life. It might not be instantly gratifying, but you will get used to it and even enjoy it. You'll see that a healthy lifestyle is very satisfying, despite the restrictions that come with it. With all that said, David Sinclair does mention one thing that is very pleasurable and is likely to prolong your life: the sauna. A study that followed 2,300 middle-aged men in Finland for over 20 years discovered that those who used the sauna just once a week were twice as likely to get heart attacks, develop heart disease, and other age-related diseases than those who use the sauna up to 7 times a week. Yeast cells live about 30% longer if they're in a hot environment, hot enough for it to be uncomfortable, that is. Like everything else I've talked about in this video, a hot sauna can act as a stressor and activate the body's longevity genes, extend life, and improve health. 20-minute sessions at relatively high temperatures are good enough, but if you can tolerate the heat for a bit longer, stay a few extra minutes because you're getting the health benefits when it becomes uncomfortable. Just remember that too much stress is a bad thing, so don't stay in the sauna for too long, and if you start feeling dizzy or as if you're going to pass out, get out of there immediately. Too much heat stress is bad for your health, and although sauna death is very rare, it has happened, so remember that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but do make sure it doesn't kill you. Let me move on to something a little more controversial: longevity molecules. There are a few that have successfully and significantly prolonged the life of a variety of organisms, and could potentially work on humans. One of them is of course rapamycin, but as I already said, scientists don't yet know enough about it, and taking it could be harmful, so for the time being, definitely don't take that one. But there are other alternatives that seem promising and appear to be much safer. But again, don't take my word for it. I am not a medical doctor, David Sinclair is also not a medical doctor, and there's always a risk when taking these kinds of things, so consult your doctor before taking any of the things I'm about to talk about. This video is strictly for educational purposes. With that out of the way, let me talk about a longevity molecule David Sinclair has been taking for over a decade: resveratrol. Resveratrol is a molecule found in red wine and grapes, among other plants, and it may prolong life by mimicking calorie restriction and activating the sirtuins, one of the longevity pathways. It works on yeast cells, fruit flies, roundworms, and mice, and resveratrol-fed obese mice have hearts, livers, and arteries that are as healthy as those of thin mice. These These obese mice also have more mitochondria, lower levels of inflammation, lower blood sugar levels, and they are less likely to develop many types of cancers and neurodegenerative diseases. They also live longer than thin mice that aren't fed resveratrol. With that said, mice that are fed resveratrol and are under an intermittent fasting regimen live even longer, and when human cells are fed resveratrol, they become resistant to DNA damage. The problem with resveratrol is that the body has a hard time absorbing it, but this can be fixed when it's consumed with fat. David Sinclair mixes 1 gram of resveratrol powder with a few spoons of full-fat yogurt. I like to mix it with mashed avocado and extra virgin olive oil. NMN is an NAD precursor, and it's another very popular longevity molecule. NAD is a product of niacin, and we can't survive without it. Sirtuins depend on it, and without high enough levels of NAD, resveratrol wouldn't have the astonishing life-prolonging effects that it has. According to David Sinclair, NAD is what fuels the sirtuins, while resveratrol acts as the accelerator pedal. Unfortunately, our body's NAD levels decline as we age, something that is very bad because, as I already said, without NAD, you're dead. This is where NMN comes in, as it raises NAD levels, and when fed to mice, it benefits their mitochondria, helps treat the symptoms of type 2 diabetes, improves their physical performance, improves their memory, increases their speed, and it increases their strength. Other studies have shown NMN to be good for the kidney and the brain, potentially preventing the development of neurodegenerative diseases. One particularly shocking benefit of taking NMN is a potential restoration of fertility. In his book, David Sinclair mentions a few women who had already reached menopause and started having monthly periods again after supplementing with NMN for some time. And a few studies on mice and horses have shown that these animals can become fertile again if they're fed NMN. Obviously, more research is required, but if NMN can really do that, wow. With that said, there is another NAD precursor on the market, nicotinamide riboside, or NR for short. Nicotinamide riboside is a form of vitamin B3 that when ingested, it transforms into NMN, which later transforms into NAD, and it can prolong the life of yeast cells and mice. It looks promising, but David Sinclair takes 1 gram of NMN every day, and doesn't take nicotinamide riboside at all. His research shows that NMN is probably the superior molecule, as it's more stable and seems to provide animals with more health benefits. But as long as NR is in a stable form, it's likely to be a very good longevity molecule as well. With all that said, NAD precursors are fairly new, and we don't yet know enough about them, so more research is needed. Only time will tell if they work on humans as well as they work on animals. Another thing that might help prolong human life is a medicine called metformin. It's prescribed to people with type 2 diabetes to lower blood glucose levels, and it's very effective, cheap, and pretty safe. But of course, there's always a risk and a downside with these kinds of things. Metformin can lower vitamin B12 levels, potentially leading to a deficiency, so some people may need to take a vitamin B12 supplement if they're taking metformin to avoid this from happening. A rare but possible side effect of taking too much metformin is a sometimes life-threatening condition called lactic acidosis. Lactic acidosis happens when there's a buildup of lactic acid in the bloodstream, but in most cases, one has to take a very high dose of metformin for this to happen, or drink a lot of alcohol while on metformin, so avoid drinking too much if you're taking it. As I said, metformin is pretty safe, not entirely safe, so if you're taking it, be responsible. Another common side effect of taking metformin is a stomach upset, but some people like this because it discourages overeating. And as you already know, overeating is one of the worst things you can do for your health. Besides lowering blood glucose and discouraging people from eating too much, metformin mimics calorie restriction. It activates an enzyme called AMPK, which blocks gluconeogenesis and increases insulin sensitivity. It activates autophagy. It helps the body produce NAD. It improves gut health and helps people lose weight. It reduces triglycerides, activates sirtuins, slows down the loss of epigenetic information. It improves ovulation in women with infrequent or prolonged menstrual menstrual periods. It reduces the risk of developing heart disease, neurodegenerative diseases, and certain types of cancer, and even reduces depression. When given to mice, it lowers their LDL cholesterol, it improves their physical performance, it reduces their risk of getting cancer, and they live about 6% longer. Also, researchers have noticed that people with type 2 diabetes that take metformin are healthier and live longer than healthy individuals that are not taking metformin. With all that said, maybe don't get too excited about metformin because you need a doctor's prescription to buy it. And if you don't have type 2 diabetes, my guess is that you'll have a hard time convincing your doctor to prescribe it to you. In a few years, things will probably change and most doctors will become aware of the anti-aging benefits of this medicine and will begin prescribing it to everyone that is old enough, even if they don't have type 2 diabetes. But we're not there yet, so for now, keep on fasting, eating healthy, and exercising. Resveratrol, NMN, and metformin are the three molecules David Sinclair talks the most about, but he actually takes a few others. In his book, he says that he also takes vitamin D3, vitamin K2, 83 grams of aspirin, and a statin, and I've also heard him say that he takes alpha-lipoic acid, coenzyme Q10, physin, quercetin, curcumin, and omega-3 fatty acids. There are quite a few studies showing how important vitamin D3 is for human health. It's an integral part of the functioning of cells. It strengthens the immune system, it activates stem cells in the gut, promotes long telomeres, and it can even help prevent cancer and Alzheimer's disease. It also helps the body absorb calcium, but the problem is that calcium won't necessarily go to the bones and teeth where we want it to be. It may end up in our soft tissues and arteries, and this isn't good at all. This is where vitamin K2 comes in. Vitamin K2 takes the calcium from our soft tissues and arteries and puts it in our bones and teeth. Weston Price was a Canadian dentist that during the 1920s and 1930s left Canada to study 12 different indigenous communities spread around the world. He was impressed by the people of one community that had perfectly straight and white teeth with no cavities despite them not brushing or flossing their teeth, never mind going to the dentist every 6 months. He figured that the reason these people had such healthy teeth was thanks to their high levels of fat-soluble vitamins such as vitamin D, and another nutrient that he wasn't familiar with. He decided to call this unknown nutrient Activator X, but scientists are pretty sure Activator X is in fact vitamin K2, and it can be found in large amounts in a Japanese dish called natto, which is essentially fermented soybeans. But most people hate how it tastes, so maybe talk to your doctor about supplementing with vitamin K2 as well as vitamin D3. David Sinclair takes a low-dose aspirin to lower inflammation and to prevent certain types of cancer. According to him, there are studies showing it can help prevent colon, liver, stomach, esophagus, bowel, and pancreatic cancer. Although it's important to mention that aspirin can be harmful to the stomach, and there are other studies suggesting that it can cause other types of problems, so definitely consult your doctor before taking it. He takes a statin to control his cholesterol, but because statins lower CoQ10 levels, he also takes a CoQ10 supplement. Let's move on to alpha-lipoic acid, which is quite fascinating. In the 4-Hour Body, Tim Ferriss has very good things to say about it. It's an antioxidant that fights off free radicals, increases excretion of toxic heavy metals such as mercury, restores levels of glutathione, a powerful and very important antioxidant that declines with age, lowers triglycerides, increases insulin sensitivity, and helps store carbohydrates in the muscles or the liver so that it isn't stored in fat. David Sinclair started taking it after learning that Dr. Denham Harman supplemented with it for most of his life to fight off free radicals. Dr. Harman kept researching aging all the way into his 90s and lived a pretty long time. He died at the age of 98 in 2014, and David suspects that alpha-lipoic acid might have contributed to his longevity. He takes quercetin because it extends the half-life of resveratrol, and other studies show that it may reduce inflammation, lower blood pressure, alleviate the symptoms of arthritis and allergies, and can even help prevent cancer and Alzheimer's disease, but more research is needed. He takes physin because of its mild senolytic effects. Studies show that it can kill senescent cells that cause inflammation in the body, and that it can extend the life of animals. Curcumin is the active compound in turmeric, and studies show it's great for the brain. It improves memory and attention span and even has antidepressive effects. Other studies have shown curcumin to help prevent neurodegenerative diseases, to prevent the buildup of plaque in the heart, to promote healthy gut bacteria, to improve insulin sensitivity, and even helps alleviate joint pain. The problem with curcumin is that it has low bioavailability, meaning that the body has a hard time absorbing it, and very little reaches the bloodstream, which is why David Sinclair recommends taking it with a fat source, as fat can increase its bioavailability, although piperine, a component of black pepper, can do the same. Omega-3 fatty acids have also shown to be great for your health, but like curcumin, they're especially good for your brain. One study found that individuals with higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids EPA and DHA maintain their brain volume better than those with lower omega-3 levels. They increase blood flow to the brain, improve memory, improve learning, and even reduce depression. And they have shown to significantly lower total mortality and help prevent diseases such as Alzheimer's and heart disease. When talking about health and longevity, the foods that you should and shouldn't eat is something that inevitably comes up. But what may seem surprising is that David says that as long as you're practicing intermittent fasting and eating in a short window every day, what you eat in that window is not as important. According to him, when you eat is more important than what you eat. But what you eat is still important. So let's talk about a few foods that may help you live longer, and a few that will most likely do the opposite. When plants are dark in color, it's a sign that they were grown under stressful conditions, and they are therefore rich in polyphenols. Like fasting, cold exposure, exercise, and longevity molecules, eating them can make the body believe it is stressed, forcing it to activate its longevity genes. Like David Sinclair, you can drink a single cup of red wine a day, as it's dark in color and contains trace amounts of resveratrol, and Stephen Gundry has said that red wine is also rich in melatonin, which is very good for one's health as well. However, if you're going to drink red wine with the purpose of improving your health and maximizing your lifespan, remember to not drink too much of it, because drinking a lot of alcohol will destroy your health and shorten your life rather than lengthening it. 1 cup a day is more than enough. Also keep in mind that the healthiest red wine is probably Pinot Noir, as it contains the most polyphenols. According to David Sinclair, like resveratrol, monounsaturated fatty acids such as olives and olive oil, nuts, and avocados activate the sirtuins and could help prolong human life. In a study conducted in Spain called the Predimit trial, thousands of subjects between the ages of 55 and 80 who were at high risk of developing heart disease, but with no heart disease at enrollment, were divided into 3 groups. 2 of the 3 groups had to follow a high-fat Mediterranean diet. One of these 2 groups had to consume a liter of olive oil a week, while the other had to consume the same amount of calories that the olive oil group consumed in olive oil, but in nuts. The 3rd group was the control group, and they had to follow a low-fat Mediterranean diet. After 5 years, the olive oil and the nut group not only had a significantly lower incidence of major cardiovascular events, but they also had better memory than before the study started. Unfortunately for the control group, after the 5 years, they had worse cardiovascular health and worse memory. I also want to mention that in the longevity paradox, Stephen Gundry says that nuts are one of the best cancer-fighting foods in the world. Mice that are fed nuts are less likely to get cancer, and people who eat nuts regularly not only lower the risk of cancer, but also lower the risk of death from any cause. And according to Stephen Gundry, even smokers are less likely to get lung cancer if they eat nuts. With all that said, if you are going to eat nuts, make sure that they are in fact nuts. I say that because 2 of the most popular nuts, peanuts and cashews, are not really nuts. Peanuts are legumes, and cashews are seeds, and they aren't as healthy. Instead, eat walnuts, pine nuts, macadamia nuts, Brazil nuts, and pistachios. A moment ago, I talked about Weston Price and one of the indigenous communities that he studied, the one that had impeccable teeth and strong bones that were consuming plenty of vitamin K2. But I didn't talk about the other indigenous communities that he studied, and they were also very interesting. They were interesting because they were very healthy. They very rarely developed age-related diseases, and although their diets were very different, they all consumed fermented foods regularly. Fermented foods such as sauerkraut, kimchi, natto, natto, miso, and kombucha are great for the microbiome because they are loaded with healthy bacteria that strengthen the immune system, increase vitamin absorption, protect us against harmful bacteria, help us stay thin, and even improve our mood by producing serotonin. As I already said, David Sinclair takes his resveratrol with a few spoons of full-fat yogurt that he makes himself in order to absorb the resveratrol, but he has said that the yogurt on its own has some benefits. In the end, it's a fermented food rich in gut-friendly bacteria, but dairy products can often be problematic, so if you are going to consume yogurt made from dairy, take note of the following. Make sure that it comes from a pasture-raised animal, and if it comes from a cow, make sure that it's from a French, Italian, or Swiss cow. If dairy isn't your thing, consider coconut yogurt. Just make sure that it's low on sugar. Let's now move on to foods you should completely avoid, or at the very least limit as much as possible. I've already talked about the problem with eating animal products and animal protein, but if it wasn't obvious, sugar in all its forms is also problematic. David Sinclair tries to keep his blood sugar levels low by avoiding desserts, grains such as wheat and rice, and even fruit, especially grapes. You might have thought that red grapes were healthy because they are dark in color and because red wine in moderation can be healthy, but they're not. Grapes contain way too much sugar, so avoid them. Also avoid honey, maple syrup, and agave nectar. Although it's not exactly a food, I should mention that David Sinclair also tries to avoid consuming too much iron. According to him, iron-rich tissue is usually loaded with senescent cells, and this accelerates the aging process. In fact, there is plenty of evidence showing that donating blood frequently can prolong life precisely because it lowers iron levels. In Denmark and in Sweden, researchers noticed that healthy individuals who donated blood frequently had longer lives than healthy individuals who didn't. And in one study, researchers fed iron to roundworms and discovered that iron caused them to age more quickly and decrease their lifespan. Also, one of the reasons why women have longer life expectancies than men is because they lose a significant amount of blood every month during their period. They have lower iron levels than men because they bleed more often. Unfortunately, once women reach menopause, their iron levels go up alongside the risk of getting a heart attack. Something that might surprise you is that among the things David Sinclair avoids are antioxidants. Well, he doesn't exactly avoid them, but he doesn't waste his money on them. According to him, antioxidants have been a major disappointment in the anti-aging field, and studies show that they will not increase your lifespan. Something that might surprise you even more is that he thinks positively of genetically modified foods, despite the studies and documentaries giving GMOs a bad rap. According to David Sinclair, although perhaps not as healthy as organic foods, GMOs are safe, and in his book, he mentions that if you believe in climate change, you should also believe that GMOs are safe because there is more evidence showing that they are safe than evidence showing that climate change is even a thing. Not only that, but he thinks foods should be modified even more in order for them to become more nutritious. For example, scientists could genetically modify certain common foods for them to have more vitamin A in them. A lot of people are deficient in vitamin A, an essential vitamin that removes the leading cause of preventable blindness in children. If scientists can confirm that metformin truly does slow down the aging process, in the near future, doctors will begin prescribing it to everyone that is old enough, even if they don't have type 2 diabetes, and with this small change, people will live slightly longer. The same could be said about rapamycin once scientists discover if it can truly prolong life, and the right way to use it for longevity. In one of David Sinclair's labs called Metro Biotech, they are currently working on a drug called MIB-626 that will raise NAD levels dramatically, even more than NMN and NR. And if all goes well, and it likely will, this drug will extend human life as well. Different labs are working on senolytic drugs that, as I already mentioned, kill senescent cells that accelerate the aging process. And with the advancements and help of gene editing, stem cells, and medical technology, if you're a young man or woman, be very excited, because chances are you will live much longer than you think. As always, thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.